The crash. The stars had been bright, a sparkling sea of distant lights as the ship soared through the endless expanse of space. But now the sky was no longer a calm ocean. It had turned into a storm, dark and unforgiving. Nara, an alien woman from a distant world, gripped the control panel as her ship shuddered and groaned under the violent pressure of the atmosphere. Beside her, her young daughter, Lyra, was holding her favorite stuffed toy tightly to her chest. The small plush bear seemed to offer the little girl some comfort amidst the chaos. "Mama, what's happening?" Lyra's voice trembled as she clutched her toy harder. Nara's heart tightened. She had tried to keep the fear hidden, but now it was impossible. Her ship, once sleek and fast, was falling out of control. She glanced at the flashing lights on the console, each warning more dire than the last. The engines were failing. The shields were down. They were crashing. "We're going to be okay, Lyra," Nara said, her voice more steady than she felt. She forced herself to smile at her daughter. "We'll find a way." But deep inside, she wasn't so sure. The ship had been damaged during an unexpected attack by unknown forces in deep space. She had barely escaped, but now it seemed like their luck had run out. The ship spiraled, breaking through clouds of strange, thick smoke. The ground below them came closer, too close. With a final jolt, the ship hit the surface of the planet with a deafening crash. The world around them spun wildly as metal twisted and groaned. Nara could hear the crash of glass and the screeching of torn steel. Lyra screamed, a sharp, terrified sound that pierced the noise around them. "Hold on, Lyra," Nara shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. She reached out and grabbed her daughter, pulling her close. Nara's heart was racing. She could feel the ship's frame buckling under the weight of the crash, and the horrible noise was deafening. Everything was spinning. Nara's head felt heavy, and the world around her seemed blurry. But she couldn't afford to lose focus. Not now. She quickly unstrapped herself from the seat and crawled to the back of the ship, where Lyra had been thrown to the floor by the force of the impact. Lyra was crying, her small face pale with fear. She was curled up against a piece of broken metal, holding her toy tightly. "Mama, I'm scared," she whimpered. Nara's heart broke. She reached down and scooped her daughter into her arms, hugging her tightly. "I know, Lyra. I'm here. We're together, and we'll make it out of here," Nara whispered, trying to calm her. She kissed her daughter's forehead gently before setting her down, checking her over for any injuries. Thankfully, Lyra was mostly unharmed, but Nara knew that wasn't enough. They were stranded on an unknown world, and the danger was far from over. Nara's mind raced. She had to act fast. She quickly accessed the emergency panel, but the screens flickered and went black. The ship's systems were completely offline. Outside the ship, she could see nothing but darkness. No stars, no moon, just the pitch-black unknown. Her heart pounded in her chest. They had to get out. Carefully, she moved to the door, trying to pry it open. The metal was warped from the impact, but with enough force, she managed to get a small opening. The cold, alien air hit her face, and she felt the weight of the planet's atmosphere press against her. She pulled herself through the door and onto the rocky ground, with Lyra following closely behind. Nara took a moment to gather her bearings. She scanned the surroundings. The ground beneath her feet was uneven, covered in strange black stones. The sky above them was a dull orange, as if the sun was just barely rising or setting. A faint wind blew, carrying a strange scent, something metallic, like rust mixed with the smell of burning. It made Nara's stomach turn. "Where are we, Mama?" Lyra's voice was small, full of wonder and fear. "I don't know, Lyra," Nara replied, her voice tinged with worry. "But we'll find a way." Nara's gaze shifted toward the horizon. The landscape was barren, rocky, and lifeless. There was no sign of any living creature, no shelter, nothing that might offer them a chance at survival. She felt the weight of the situation crushing down on her. They were alone, and this planet was not friendly. She looked back at the wrecked ship. The ship that had once been her pride, her lifeline, now lay in ruins, twisted metal scattered across the ground. It would take days, maybe weeks, to repair it, if she could even manage to fix it at all. For now, they had no choice but to survive. "Stay close, Lyra," Nira said softly, her protective instincts kicking in. She placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, guiding her away from the wreckage. "We need to find shelter. We'll be okay. Just stay with me." Lyra nodded, her small hand gripping her mother's as they walked into the unknown, step by careful step. As they moved further into the wilderness of this alien world, Nira's mind raced. She wasn't just protecting Lyra, she was fighting for their survival. And if there was one thing she knew, it was that humans were not the only ones who fought for their lives. Nira was determined to survive, for herself, and for Lyra. Whatever dangers this planet held, whatever creatures roamed its surface, she would face them all. She would fight, and she would survive. And in the end, she would find a way to get them off this planet. The search for shelter. The alien planet stretched out before them, an endless expanse of jagged rocks and swirling winds. The air felt thick and harsh, biting at Nira's exposed skin. It was unlike anything she had ever encountered. The planet's atmosphere had a strange metallic scent, and the wind carried a low, mournful whistle. It sounded like the planet itself was alive, watching them. Nira looked down at Lyra, who was still clutching her stuffed bear. Her small face was pale from the shock of the crash, her eyes wide with uncertainty. But there was a spark of resilience in her, a quiet strength that made Nira's heart swell with both pride and fear. "We need to find shelter, Lyra," Nira said softly, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. "Somewhere safe." Lyra nodded silently, her hand reaching for her mother's. Nira held her tightly, feeling the weight of her daughter's trust. The two of them were alone on a foreign world, with no way of knowing what dangers lurked beyond the horizon. Every step they took felt like a gamble. The silence between them was only broken by the eerie wind. Nira couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, waiting for them to make a mistake. The planet was cold, colder than she had expected, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to shift unnaturally. The rocks were sharp, making it hard to find stable footing. Nira's legs ached from the crash, but she didn't dare show any weakness. Lyra needed her strong. As they moved further into the planet's desolate landscape, the wind began to pick up, and Nira could feel the temperature dropping rapidly. She wrapped her arms around Lyra, pulling her close, but it wasn't enough to shield them both from the cold. "There," Nira pointed ahead, her eyes catching the faintest outline of a structure in the distance. It looked like a ruined building, half buried under the rocks. They were too far to be sure, but it was their only hope. "Mama, it looks like a house," Lyra said, her voice barely a whisper, but filled with a thread of hope. Nira nodded, though her heart pounded in her chest. It could be anything. A shelter, a trap, or worse. But they had no choice. With renewed determination, they hurried towards the building. The wind howled louder as if warning them away. But Nira pressed on, her eyes fixed on the structure ahead. As they approached the building, Nira felt a growing sense of unease. The closer they got, the more the structure looked like it had been abandoned for ages. The walls were crumbling and vines, strange, glowing vines, crawled up the side of the building, their luminescence casting an eerie light. Nira reached out and touched the surface of the wall, her fingers brushing against the cold stone. It didn't feel like anything she had ever encountered. The wall was smooth but slick, almost like it had been designed to resist touch. Her skin tingled with an unnatural static energy. "Is it safe, Mama?" Lyra asked, her voice trembling. Nira paused, listening. The silence of the area was oppressive, and there was something unsettling about the way the wind seemed to die the moment they stepped closer to the ruins. The absence of sound made her skin crawl. "We'll find out soon," Nira whispered, more to herself than to Lyra. She couldn't ignore the gut feeling that something was wrong, but they needed shelter. They had to keep moving. With a deep breath, Nira pushed against the door. It creaked open, revealing a dark interior. "Stay close," Nira instructed as she stepped inside, her eyes straining to adjust to the darkness. The air inside was thick with dust, and the temperature was much warmer. But there was an unsettling stillness. The room seemed to be waiting for them. Lyra clung to her mother's side as they cautiously moved forward. The floor was uneven, and every step they took seemed to echo in the dead silence. They could see remnants of old furniture scattered about, broken chairs, overturned tables, but it looked as though nothing had lived here for a long time. Nira's hand tightened around Lyra's as she took a careful step forward, her senses on high alert. Her every instinct told her to leave, but the need for shelter overruled her fears. They were alive, but for how long? The unknown creatures outside, the harsh environment. They had to stay hidden. And then, from the corner of the room, Nira noticed something strange. An odd glowing object embedded in the wall. It hummed with a quiet, rhythmic energy, like a heartbeat pulsing through the space. Nira's breath caught in her throat. What was this? Before she could move closer, a sound broke the stillness. A low, guttural growl from the shadows. Nira spun around, heart racing. The room seemed to close in on them. The growl grew louder, more threatening. Something was coming, something large, and it was hunting them. "Lyra, stay behind me," Nira shouted as she reached for her weapon, her pulse pounding in her ears. The growl grew closer, echoing in the darkened room. Nira didn't have time to think. She could feel the eyes of the predator on her, like it was circling, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Where is it?" Nira muttered under her breath, her weapon now drawn, ready for whatever came next. But the creature wasn't alone. From the shadows, several more shapes emerged, all moving closer. Nira's eyes narrowed. There was no way they were going to survive this, unless she made the first move. The chase was about to begin. A glimmer of hope. The inside of the building was as oppressive as the outside, but in a different way. The air felt heavier, thick with ancient dust, and something else, something strange, almost alive. Nira squinted in the dim light, trying to make out the layout of the room. It was large, with high, vaulted ceilings that seemed to stretch impossibly far above them. The walls were lined with broken windows, and the floor was cracked and uneven, as though the structure had been abandoned for centuries. Lyra stayed close, her small hand gripping Nira's tightly. Her wide, frightened eyes scanned the shadows, and Nira could see the fear in her daughter's face. "I don't like this place, Mama," Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. "It feels wrong." Nira's heart ached for her little girl. She wanted to tell her that everything would be fine. But the truth was, Nira didn't know if they were safe here, but they had no other choice. They couldn't survive out in the open. And this place, strange as it was the only refuge they'd found. "We'll just stay for a little while, Lyra," Nira said, trying to comfort her. "We'll rest and figure out what to do next." She moved deeper into the building, scanning the space for anything useful. It looked like an abandoned shelter, though nothing about it was familiar to her. The walls were covered with strange symbols, written in a language she didn't understand. Some of the symbols glowed faintly, as if they were alive, pulsing with an inner energy. Lyra, sensing her mother's unease, ventured ahead a few steps, peering into the shadows. "Look, Mama," she exclaimed, her voice filled with a mixture of excitement and curiosity. She pointed towards a dark corner of the room, where a faint blue light flickered. Nira's eyes snapped to the spot, her pulse quickening. Was it a trap, or was it someone, that could help them? Cautiously, Nira moved towards the light, her senses on high alert. The air grew colder the closer they got, and she could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Lyra was right behind her small footsteps barely audible. As they reached the corner, Neera's breath caught in her throat. There, in the shadowed corner of the room, was a strange object, an ancient-looking device, half buried under rubble and dust. The blue light came from within it, and as Neera knelt down to examine it, she noticed it was pulsing, like a heartbeat. "What is this?" Neera murmured to herself, her fingers brushing against the device's surface. It was smooth and metallic, unlike anything she had ever encountered, but it was somehow familiar, a part of the planet's strange history, perhaps. Suddenly, the device hummed to life, and Neera froze. The blue light flared brighter, casting long, eerie shadows across the room. The symbols on the walls seemed to shift, their glow intensifying. It was as though the entire room was awakening from a long, deep sleep. Lyra stepped forward, her face lit by the soft glow of the device. "Mama, what's happening?" Neera didn't have an answer. She reached out to touch the device again, her hand trembling. The moment her fingers made contact, a loud, mechanical sound echoed through the building. The ground beneath them shook, and a section of the wall slid open, revealing the hidden passage. "Stay close, Lyra," Neera said urgently. She grabbed her daughter's hand and led her toward the newly revealed doorway. The passage beyond was narrow and dark, the air thick with the smell of metal and decay. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, Neera's mind raced. What had they uncovered? Was this some kind of ancient technology, or was it a trap? The passage opened up into a vast chamber, and Neera's eyes widened in shock. Before them stood a colossal structure, an enormous alien machine, unlike anything she had ever seen. It was alive with energy, its surface covered in glowing patterns and lines that seemed to shift with each passing second. At the center of the room was a large holographic map of the galaxy, showing distant star systems and planets Neera didn't recognize. "What is this?" Neera whispered, awe and fear swirling in her chest. Lyra tugged at her sleeve, her voice small but clear. "Mama, what is that light?" Neera looked down to see a soft golden glow emanating from a pedestal beside the machine. On top of the pedestal rested a strange artifact, an orb, pulsing with a warm, inviting light. It looked almost alive. Without thinking, Neera stepped forward. As she reached for the orb, a voice, low, resonant, and ancient, echoed through the chamber, startling her. "Welcome, traveler. You have awoken the Keeper." Neera froze, her heart pounding. The voice was not human. It wasn't even alien in the way she knew. It was something older, something vast. Lyra looked up at her with wide eyes. "Mama, what was that?" Neera didn't answer. The orb had stopped pulsing, and the machine before them hummed with new life. The walls trembled, and Neera felt an intense pull, like the entire chamber was drawing her in. "You seek hope," the voice continued, "but the path ahead will not be easy. Choose wisely, for the Keeper will test your will, and the fate of your kind depends on your decision." A chill ran down Neera's spine. What had they just found? The unexpected ally. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, its walls slick and cold, and the air grew even heavier as they ventured deeper into the hidden passage. Neera could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on her, but she couldn't stop. Lyra was still by her side, clinging to her mother's hand, her tiny footsteps barely making a sound. The blue glow from the device still flickered behind them, casting strange shadows that twisted and danced along the narrow walls. Each step they took was measured, cautious. Something didn't feel right about this place. It felt like they were intruding on a secret that had been hidden for centuries. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of machinery beneath their feet. After what felt like hours of walking, they finally reached the end of the tunnel. The passage opened up into a small chamber, dimly lit by a series of glowing panels embedded in the stone walls. At the center of the room stood an odd structure, like a large metal archway, humming softly with energy. Neera's instincts screamed at her to turn back, to leave the mysterious chamber behind. But Lyra, tugging at her sleeve, was drawn to it. "Mama, what is that?" Lyra asked, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and fear. "I don't know," Nera replied quietly. "But we need to be careful." As Nera stepped forward, her foot struck something hard on the floor. She froze. The sound echoed through the chamber, sharp and unexpected. She crouched down to inspect it, her eyes widening as she realized it was a weapon. A strange, glowing blade that seemed to hum with a life of its own. She reached for it, hesitating just for a moment before gripping the handle. It felt alive in her hand, as if it was an extension of herself. She stood up, cautiously scanning the room for any other signs of danger. That's when she heard it. The sound of footsteps, soft but deliberate, coming from the shadows at the far end of the chamber. Nera's heart skipped a beat. She didn't have time to react, her hand instinctively tightening around the glowing blade as she spun to face the source of the noise. A figure emerged from the darkness, a silhouette outlined by the faint glow of the panels on the walls. It was a human. At least it looked like a human. The figure was tall, with broad shoulders and a long coat that fluttered in the slight breeze of the chamber. His face was partially obscured by a hood, but Nera could see the sharp glint of his eyes, piercing through the shadows. "Who are you?" Nera demanded, her voice steady despite the surge of adrenaline. She stepped protectively in front of Lyra, her new weapon raised, ready for a fight if necessary. The man raised his hands in a gesture of peace, his posture calm and non-threatening. "Easy there," he said, his voice rough but not unfriendly. "I mean you no harm." Nera didn't lower the weapon. "Who are you, and what is this place?" The man smiled faintly, the edges of his lips curling upward. "My name is Ethan. And this place, well, it's a remnant of a time long past. A safe house, if you will, built by an ancient civilization." Nera's mind raced. The human. Here. Alone. "How did you find this place?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. Ethan seemed to sense her suspicion. "I didn't find it. Exactly. I've been looking for something. Someone. It seems I'm not the only one now," he said, his gaze flicking to Lyra before meeting Nera's eyes again. "Why are you here?" Nera pressed, still wary. She had no reason to trust this stranger, especially with everything that had happened since the crash. Ethan took a step forward, his hand still raised in peace. "I was part of a rescue mission. A few months ago, my crew and I were stranded here, much like you. We were searching for survivors, but we didn't find any. I've been trying to piece together what happened ever since." His words caught Nera off guard. "You've been here for months, alone." Ethan nodded. "Yes, but I'm not completely alone. There are others. There are still survivors. They're scattered across this planet, held captive by something far worse than you can imagine. I've been trying to free them." A chill ran down Nera's spine. "Captives? By whom?" "The alien empire that controls this planet," Ethan said grimly. "They've enslaved the locals and anyone else they can capture. I'm here to stop them." Nera took a step back, her mind racing. This was too much to process all at once. But as much as she didn't want to, she felt a strange pull of hope. A human, alive, and fighting to free others. It was a rare thing, this glimmer of solidarity in the darkness. "You want us to help you?" Nera asked cautiously. Ethan's eyes softened, and he nodded. "If you can. We're stronger together. There's strength in numbers, and if we don't act soon, it will be too late for all of us. The Empire is coming." Nera's grip on the glowing blade tightened. The world around her was broken, but in Ethan's words, there was a flicker of something she hadn't felt since the crash. A chance. A chance to not just survive, but to fight back. "I'll help you," Nera said quietly. "But if you're lying to me, Ethan, you'll regret it." Ethan met her gaze without flinching. "I'm not lying, Nera. And you won't regret this." Together, they stood in the heart of the chamber, the ancient device still humming softly behind them. For the first time since the crash, Nira felt something she hadn't expected, a glimmer of hope. The fight for survival. Ethan's eyes darkened at her question. He seemed to hesitate for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. The silence in the room grew heavy, punctuated only by the soft hum of the strange technology around them. "I'm here because I'm trying to survive," he said finally, his voice flat and cold. "And if you're smart, you'll stop asking questions and start running. They're coming." Nira's grip on the glowing blade tightened, and she stepped forward. "Who is coming?" she demanded. "And what do you mean by survive?" Ethan looked between Nira and Lyra, his face briefly contorting with some unspoken emotion. Then he gave a quick, almost imperceptible shake of his head, as though he was weighing the risk of saying too much. "Monsters," he said simply, his eyes flicking to the shadows that lingered at the edges of the room. "Not just any monsters. These are creatures from the deepest corners of this planet. They hunt in packs, and they don't stop until they've torn everything apart." Nira felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard whispers of such beasts, tales from travelers who spoke of the deadly predators lurking on the forgotten planets of the galaxy. But hearing it from someone who had survived made the danger feel all too real. "Then we need to leave. Now," Nira said urgently, pulling Lyra closer to her, but Ethan didn't move. Instead, his gaze turned toward the glowing archway in the center of the room. "Leaving won't help," Ethan replied. "We can't outrun them. We'll need to fight back if we want a chance at survival." Nira's eyes flicked to the archway. It pulsed faintly, as if calling to them. "What is that? Does it lead somewhere safe?" "Safe?" Ethan chuckled, but there was no humor in his voice. "That's not what it's for. It's an ancient device, a weapon built by the same civilization that created this place. It's a gateway, a tool to fight the creatures that roam this planet. But it's also a trap." "A trap?" Nira echoed, confused. "Then why?" Before she could finish her question, a distant, guttural growl interrupted her. It was low and rumbling, like the roar of a predator testing the air. Then the sound grew louder, closer. Ethan cursed under his breath. "They found us." The chamber was suddenly alive with movement as shadows skittered across the walls. The growl grew into a chorus, a cacophony of snarling, hungry sounds. From the darkened corners, shapes began to emerge. Large, hulking figures with gleaming eyes and sharp, jagged teeth. Their bodies were covered in thick, scaly hides, and their claws scraped against the floor as they advanced. Nira's heart pounded in her chest as she saw their glowing eyes fix on her and Lyra. Ethan grabbed the glowing blade from Nira's hand, his movements fast and decisive. "Stay close," he ordered. He took a defensive stance, ready to face the beasts head-on. "What do we do?" Nira demanded, her pulse racing. Ethan's eyes flickered toward the glowing arch. "We have no choice. That thing can help us, but only if we trigger it properly. We have to hold them off long enough to activate it." Without another word, Ethan charged forward, brandishing the glowing blade with ease. He swung it at the nearest creature, cutting through the air with a bright flash of blue light. The creature screeched as the blade struck its chest, the energy from the weapon cutting deep into its flesh. But the beast wasn't down. It recoiled but quickly lunged again, its claws slashing through the air. Nira didn't hesitate. She grabbed a large piece of debris from the floor, an old rusted metal bar, and swung it at another creature that was sneaking up behind Ethan. The force of the blow sent the creature stumbling back, but it quickly recovered, its glowing eyes narrowing in fury. "Mama!" Lyra's terrified voice cut through the chaos, and Nira turned just in time to see her daughter clutching her stuffed bear, standing in the corner of the room, wide-eyed and frozen in fear. "Lyra, stay back!" Nira yelled, but Lyra didn't move. Nira's heart ached. She couldn't risk both of them being trapped. She charged forward, pulling Lyra into her arms, just as one of the creatures lunged toward her. The beast's claws scraped across her shoulder, drawing a sharp cry from Mira. The pain shot through her like fire, but she fought through it, twisting and using the momentum to shove the creature back. With Ethan's blade cutting down another creature and the others falling back, the remaining beasts hesitated, sensing that something was wrong. The energy in the room had shifted, and the survivors seemed more dangerous than they had anticipated. "We need to get to the arch now," Ethan shouted, slashing at one of the larger creatures, forcing it to retreat. "There's no time to waste." With Lyra in her arms, Nira sprinted toward the archway, feeling the rush of adrenaline in her veins. Ethan followed closely behind, his weapon flashing through the air as he cut down another beast. The archway hummed louder now, the faint blue glow intensifying as they neared it. Nira reached out to touch the base of the arch, her fingers trembling from the rush of energy in the room. Before she could finish, the ground beneath them shook violently. The monsters had regrouped and were charging once again. Nira's heart pounded as she heard their growls getting closer. Time was running out. "Activated, Ethan," Nira shouted. Ethan nodded, his face grim, and rushed toward the device. With one swift motion, he slammed his hand into the center of the arch. The room exploded with light. The revelation. The fight erupted around them in a chaos of flashing lights and guttural roars. Nira's heart hammered in her chest as the monsters closed in, their eyes glowing with malevolent hunger. The creatures were relentless, their claws tearing through the stone floor, their mouths snapping with jagged teeth that dripped with saliva. Ethan fought like a man possessed. His glowing blade sliced through the air with terrifying precision, cutting deep into the creatures that dared to approach. Each strike seemed to strike at the very essence of the beasts, but still, they kept coming. Nira couldn't keep up. She could barely even focus on the battle as her mind screamed at her to protect Lyra. "Mama!" Lyra's terrified voice snapped Nira out of her panic. She turned to find her daughter clutching her leg wide-eyed and trembling. The little girl was barely able to stand, the weight of the danger overwhelming her. "Stay behind me," Nira ordered, her voice rough with fear. She tried to pull Lyra to safety, but as she turned, one of the creatures lunged at them. The massive beast's claws were extended, aiming straight for Lyra. Without thinking, Nira stepped between them, thrusting the glowing blade forward. It met the creature's chest with a deafening crack, its skin burning and sizzling under the energy of the weapon. But the creature wasn't dead. It staggered back, stunned but not defeated. The room was spinning with tension as the remaining creatures closed in from all sides. Ethan's blade hummed with deadly force, but even he was starting to tire. The numbers were too great, and the beasts were too powerful. Suddenly, a piercing, high-pitched noise filled the chamber, drowning out the battle's sounds. Nira felt the air shift as something ancient, almost sentient, stirred in the heart of the building. The glowing archway flickered again, brighter this time, as if reacting to the chaos. "Get to the arch," Ethan shouted, his voice strained. "Now, it's the only way we'll survive." Nira hesitated, her mind racing. The arch was still surrounded by a dangerous glow, and she wasn't sure what it could do, but there was no time to question it. She grabbed Lyra, pulling her towards the arch. Behind them, Ethan was still fighting, but Nira could see he was struggling. The creatures were relentless, and his strength was fading. As they reached the arch, a strange pulse of energy radiated from the device. The air around them shimmered, and for a brief moment, Nira could see images flicker across the glowing panels, strange landscapes, distant stars, and figures that moved with lightning speed. Nira's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just a gateway, it was a weapon. With a final, desperate cry, Ethan sprinted toward them, slashing at one of the beasts that was closing in on him. His blade cut through the air, but the creature's claws raked across his side. Ethan stumbled, his body pitching forward as he fell to his knees. "Ethan!" Nira screamed, instinctively reaching for him, but he waved her off. His blood was staining the floor, but his eyes were fixed on the archway. "Activate it," he rasped, his voice filled with urgency. "This is the only way." Nira stood frozen, the weight of his words sinking in. The arch could save them, but it could also be the end. Taking a deep breath, Nira pressed the glowing blade against the arch's center. The moment it made contact, the arch pulsed violently, and the entire room shook. The high-pitched, resonating hum filled the air as energy crackled around them. The creatures roared in fury, their monstrous forms blurring as they rushed towards them. Suddenly, the arch flashed, and a massive surge of energy shot out in all directions. It was like a shockwave, so powerful that it knocked Nira off her feet. The creatures screamed as they were thrown back, their bodies disintegrating into a cloud of ash and light. The air around them crackled with raw power, the very fabric of reality warping in the wake of the explosion. Nira gasped, clutching Lyra tightly to her chest. The last of the creatures were gone, reduced to nothing but dust and fragments. She looked around, stunned by what had just happened. The room had changed, the eerie glow of the archway now a soft, pulsing light that seemed almost peaceful. But Ethan was still on the floor, his blood staining the stone. Nira rushed to him, falling to her knees beside him. His face was pale, his breath shallow. "You did it," he murmured weakly, his eyes flickering as he looked up at her. "You activated it." Nira's throat tightened. "But you're hurt. You're—" Ethan smiled faintly, the corners of his lips twitching. "I've lived through worse. Just make sure you don't forget why you're here. This planet, it isn't just a random crash site, it's a key. And the monsters, they were just the beginning." His voice trailed off, and his eyes fluttered closed. Nira's heart pounded in her chest as she gripped his hand. He had given them a chance to survive, to escape, but there was still so much left to understand. About the planet, about the archway, and about the enemies that had hunted them. They had only just begun to uncover the truth. The real battle was just beginning. With a final glance at the now peaceful archway, Nira made a silent vow to herself. She would survive. For Lyra, for Ethan, for all of them. The galaxy's greatest mysteries awaited them, and they would face them together. The escape and the truth. The air in the chamber exploded with energy. A bright, blinding light engulfed Nira, Lyra, and Ethan as the archway responded to the weapon's touch. The very ground beneath their feet seemed to warp and ripple, as if the fabric of reality itself was being torn apart. Nira felt her body jerked forward, pulled by an invisible force. Lyra screamed in surprise, clutching her mother's arm with all her strength. The last thing Nira saw before the world around them dissolved into pure white light was the monstrous creatures lunging towards them, their glowing eyes filled with hunger. For a moment, everything was darkness. And then, thud. Nira hit the ground hard, the sudden sensation of solid earth under her feet taking her by surprise. She blinked rapidly, trying to clear the blinding light from her eyes. When her vision finally adjusted, she found herself standing in a completely different place. The air was cooler here, fresher, and the sounds of the monstrous creatures were gone. "Where are we?" Nira whispered, her voice barely audible as she took in her surroundings. They were no longer in the ruins. Instead, they stood at the edge of a vast, green forest, with towering trees that stretched high into the sky, their leaves shimmering in the dim light of a twin sunset. The ground beneath them was soft, and the distant sound of a flowing river filled the air. The landscape was peaceful, almost serene. Lyra looked up at her mother, her face still pale, but her wide eyes filled with wonder. "Mama, this place, it's beautiful." Nira's mind raced. They had just escaped certain death. But where had the archway sent them? This place felt like another world, another galaxy entirely. And if they were here, where was Ethan? She turned quickly to find him lying on the ground, a short distance away, his body unmoving. His face was pale, his clothes torn, and blood stained the edges of his shirt. Ethan. Nira rushed to his side, panic flooding her chest. She dropped to her knees beside him, feeling for a pulse. He was breathing, shallow, but alive. She let out a sigh of relief and quickly tore off a piece of her clothing, using it to staunch the wound on his side. Lyra knelt beside her, still clutching her stuffed bear. "Is he going to be okay, Mama?" Nira didn't answer right away. Her mind was still spinning from the chaotic series of events. She had no idea where they were, how they had survived, or what this new place meant for their future. But one thing was clear: Ethan had saved them. And now, it was her turn to save him. After a few moments, Ethan's eyes fluttered open, his gaze unfocused at first. He blinked, slowly recognizing Nira kneeling beside him. "You're here," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "You made it." Nira nodded. "We made it, thanks to you." Ethan's lips twitched into a small smile, though the pain was clear on his face. "You've got more to thank me for than that." He paused, his breath shallow. "You don't know where this is, do you?" Nira shook her head. "No. What is this place? And how did you know about the archway?" Ethan swallowed hard, his brow furrowing as he gathered what little strength he had left. "I'm not just some wanderer, Nira. I wasn't stranded here by accident. This planet, it's a refuge, a place where people from many worlds were brought together to escape the same monsters you were running from." Nira's eyes narrowed. "Escape? From what? Who brought you here?" Ethan struggled to sit up, his hands trembling. "It's not just the monsters that are dangerous, Nira. There's a force, an ancient civilization that built this place. They created the archway, not just as a weapon, but as a sanctuary, if you could unlock it. But it's not the sanctuary, it seems. This place is a test." "A test?" Nira repeated, confused. "What do you mean?" Ethan's eyes were distant, filled with a deep, quiet sadness. "This is where the lost survivors are sent. But it's not just a refuge. It's a breeding ground for something much darker. The creatures that attacked you, they're part of it. They were created, used as weapons, controlled by something, or someone, who wants to shape the future. The safe house was never meant to be safe at all." Nira recoiled slightly, trying to process the weight of his words. "Then why help us? Why save us?" Ethan's gaze softened, and he grimaced against the pain. "Because it's too late for me. I've seen what's coming. But you and Lyra, you're different. You can make it. You can stop it all." Nira swallowed hard, the weight of his words crushing down on her. "Stop what? What do we have to do?" Ethan's voice grew weaker, but there was a sense of urgency in his eyes. "You need to find the source, the heart of the machines, the ones who built all of this. They are still out there, and they're planning something far worse than just killing us. You must stop them before it's too late." Before Nira could respond, Ethan's eyes fluttered closed again, and his body went limp. "Stay with us, Ethan." Nira cried, but there was no response. He was unconscious again, his life hanging by a fragile thread. Nira turned to Lyra, her expression firming with resolve. "We can't stop now, Lyra. We've come too far to let it all be in vain. We need to find this source, whatever it is, and end this madness." Lyra nodded solemnly, her little hand gripping Nira's tightly. "We'll do it, Mama." Nira's heart burned with a fierce determination. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for sure. No matter the cost, they would survive. They had to. For each other, for the future, and for Ethan, who had given them a second chance.